This is the RPG Pundit, final boss in Internet Shitlords. And today I want to talk to you about another one of the things that they say people are teaching you these days in D&D that they're teaching you wrong. But first I wanted to point out something, just for general knowledge. I got the Lion and Dragon here and Dark Albion. Both of these are in hardcover. And yeah, I wanted to comment on something, which is that I've had, both of these for a while now. The Dark Albion hardcover is only available on Lulu, and it's available in this one or an alternate hardcover, an alternate cover. The inside is the same, the cover is just different. It's a different image. And those are only on Lulu. The soft cover and PDF are on DTRPG. And so this is the Lulu hardcover. This is the DTRPG hardcover of Lion and Dragon. I've had both of these for some time. I've had Dark Albion for a lot longer because it came out earlier. It came out quite a few years earlier. And this workhorse, I played all through a long Dark Albion campaign, and now I've got a Lion and Dragon campaign that's going on. The Dark Albion campaign was the one where Lion and Dragon was developed. And it's in incredible state, incredible condition. The Lion and Dragon one I've had for, over a year now, and I've played the hell out of it in this year-long L&D campaign that's still ongoing. And I've given a lot of effort, and the Lion and Dragon one is also a rule book, whereas Dark Albion is a setting book. So rule books, you tend to look through them more. So it's had a lot of use. And I think, because I want to be completely honest here, that the hardcover, the L&D hardcover, the DTRPG made hardcover for Lion and Dragon, has had a bit more wear to it already than the Dark Albion hardcover, which seems to have resisted better. And I wanted to know if anyone else had that same kind of experience. If you bought Lion and Dragon in hardcover, it might also be because it's a smaller book, so it's a slimmer hardcover, or something to do with the binding, I don't know. But I just wanted to see if anyone else had that same experience. I've got both Lion and Dragon both in hardcover and softcover. The hardcover is obviously prettier, but I think for actual play it probably would be just as good to use the paperback version. I can't really say the same for the Dark Albion one, because the Dark Albion is a bigger book. It's more elaborate, and it's super beautiful, but also it seems to have held up a lot better. So I don't know. I just wanted to comment that. I wanted to see if that was the experience of other people. I like to know whether my clients are satisfied, my customers are satisfied by their experiences with my books. So please do let me know. So anyway, today I was going to talk about player consent, I guess you could say, right? And there seems to be an impression among a younger crowd of gamers of things like, well, you can't kill a player character unless the player says it's okay, right? And stuff like this, right? Or that you can't even have bad things happen to them, right? That players have to have a say in what happens to their character outside and above them deciding what choices their character makes in the game. And of course, this is almost entirely untrue. There are a couple of exceptions, both of which are kind of the rights. What the player can consent to do is to join the campaign or to leave the campaign. Those are the things that they can do. And so at the time of joining the campaign, I think it's very important that you make clear, if you're the DM, what the campaign is about, right? If this is going to be a campaign that's going to have a lot of bloodshed, right, that player characters are going to die, then you probably want to tell them that, especially if they're, millennial gamers who are used to a softer kind of D&D, and you're running something more OSR like Lion and Dragon, where fatality is a lot easier. Maybe they haven't played before, right? So you don't want to, if you're a DM, you don't want to be an asshole. You don't want to surprise your players about that. And I think, obviously, if you're planning to deal with mature themes, let's call it, right, with things that could happen to player characters that, to use the language of the millennial crowd, could be triggering, then you probably do want to mention that, right? You want to tell them if it's, this is a grim and edgy world where terrible things can happen to you, or something like that, right? At least something like that. And make that clear. Okay, so that's a good thing to do. It's just wise in general to establish those as facts on the ground when you're setting up your campaign, so that your players know what they're getting themselves into and can tell you at the moment of the beginning of the campaign whether they're cool with that or not. The other thing you have to remember as a DM is that the one inalienable right that your players have is to say, I quit, right? That's what they can do. They can leave the campaign. They can leave the campaign at any time. And so you have to make sure that the campaign more or less fits what they wanted it to be, within the boundaries of also what you want it to be, because you don't want to be running a campaign that isn't what you actually want to run. So don't resort to running a game you don't want to run, or playing with players who don't want to play what you do want to run. That's not a good alternative, right? Figure out a way to find the right people for the right game, right? If there's more than one game that you want to run and there's something everyone can agree on, including you as the DM, then great, right? But if not, you definitely don't want to try to run something that you're not going to enjoy. And players, if you've been forewarned, then if you accept, you should accept and deal with it, right? And if you really get into something that happens in the game that you don't want to deal with, your only right in that situation is to leave the table. And you probably should do it, right? If you're so affected by something that happens to your character, then by all means, quit the game, right? Why in the world would you want to stay in a game where something like that is happening, right? But what you don't have a right to do, and what is nonsense, is this idea that players have some kind of agency over their player characters above and beyond the choices that they're making for their characters in the game, right? You do not get to say no to your character being cursed, to your character losing a limb, to your character being tortured, to your character dying, right? This idea that you have a veto over whether or not your character dies goes completely outside of everything that is good practice in RPG play in order to create a game that is playable. And by that I mean that if the goal is that you're trying to create an immersive experience where emulation is being used to make immersion happen, then you can't have this idea that at any time you can just step out of it and say no and then change the world, right? The world doesn't get to change, right? It's like that song "Common People," right, where it says the woman's pretending to be poor, and in the song it says even if you're lying in your dingy bed and seeing cockroaches on the wall, that if you call your daddy, he could put a stop to all of it, right? So it's not even real then, right? So you can't fake this, right? You can't fake a gritty game or an OSR game, medieval authentic game, if you by knowing that at any moment you can try to put up your hand and say, no, we don't want to allow this, right? So be clear. If you're a player, by all means, be clear to tell your DM carefully at the start of the campaign or at the start of the time when you're planning to start playing what your kind of interests are and what your limits are. That's fine, and that's something you should do, and he should listen, right? And then he should tell you whether this is the campaign for you or not. He shouldn't necessarily change what he has in mind for you. That's up to the DM, but he should be very sure that you're the right person for the campaign and that this is the right campaign for you, which you should also be sure of. But you can't just jump in the middle and say, well, I don't want to quit, but I also really don't want my character to lose a foot or something like that, right? Like, you can't do that, right? This is what's happening in the world, right? This is the context of it, right? The biggest absurdity that we've seen, and this is obviously tied into a couple of things within the kind of the anti-D&D crowd and the anti-RPG crowd that want to change RPGs into something they're not, have always pushed, among other things, for the deprotagonization of the DM. For the DM to become powerless, to be like the Monopoly banker, where he hasn't got any real authority. He just has to follow what the almighty and all-wise game designers, who are the right people, right, the special elites of the gaming world, have put in the rules, and that then the players get to enforce, right, and he gets no control. So they tried to push this narrative that somehow the RPG world should be collaborative. The problem with that is that the immersive experience for a player depends on them not being an author of the world. They have to be a part of the world. Just like you in the real life, Your authorship of the real world is limited to what you are capable of doing within the real world. There's no moment, I mean, unless you're something I've never run into in all my years as a wizard, there's no moment where you can step out of the universe and say, well, you know what? This doesn't work for me, so I'm just going to change the laws of physics or the way of nature or change time and space itself to just, rewrite this so that instead this other thing happens, right? In fact, that's pretty much the opposite of how changes can happen in the world, right? If you want to change something, as the Chinese say, do it before it happens. So if you don't think you're going to be comfortable with a campaign, the best time to quit it is before you join, right? But even then, once you do join, you do have the right to quit. You don't have the right to put your demands on the rest of the party or else, right? Or else what? The or else there is you quit. And I've had that happen in my games a couple of times, not a lot because I'm usually very careful, and I've become more careful over the years in selecting the right players for the right campaigns. But it's happened a couple of times where I've had people, not usually for good reasons, because this rarely happens for good reasons, right? More about that later. But where people have said, oh, I want this to change. And if you don't change, then, I'm going to go on strike or something like that, right? And I'm like, well, okay, then leave, right? Because also as a DM, you have the right to kick someone out of the campaign. And that's just how it goes. The only risk there is that the other players might not agree with you. And if they don't, they also have the right to leave the campaign. They don't have the right to force you to keep playing with someone if you're the GM that you don't want to play with. Just like if there is someone in the party you decide you don't want to play with and the DM doesn't want to kick them out, you have the right to leave. You don't have the right to force the DM to kick them out. You have the right to leave. You have the right to tell the DM you will leave, let him make the choice or whatever. But you can't, there's no universe where you get to put demands on changing the campaign world that the DM is obliged to obey, right? That's not going to happen. Not in any game that is going to actually end up being functional, and that's that. There's no way you can make a game that is actually functional where one player can decide to derail the entire campaign and hold it hostage, and nobody else has a say in that, right? And this is the failure of things like the X card, right? The X card is this notion, for those of you who don't know, that came up originally in some convention games and has then been pushed by the SJW crowd as something that should be basically forced on all gaming everywhere, where any player can at any moment decide that something in the game is not going to happen by raising the card and saying, I'm calling the X card on this or something like that, right? And of course the justification that they claim is, oh, well, let's say, I don't know, some gamer has had prior experience of sexual abuse and then the evil DM is playing out his filthy perverted fantasies in the game and you raise the X card and then that stops the patriarchy or something like that, right? The scenario that never happens, right? I'll tell you what actually happens with these cards, right? Is that assholes, pretty much usually SJW assholes, though most of the times they're not real progressives of any kind. They just use that because they know it's the currency of power in our modern era. They will use these cards to hold the rest of the game hostage to whatever their whims are. Sometimes even as petty as demanding that something in the game that benefits them should happen or something that would harm them shouldn't happen for no other reason than that they want to have their character be powerful, right? These cards basically give a carte blanche to any player to do this sort of thing and have no consequence. There's no way you're allowed to question it. There's no way you're allowed to discuss it. You as the DM would have to obey, right? And in any game that is a meaningful game, this is impossible. It derails all sense of immersion in the game. It ruins the game effectively, which is kind of the point, because these are the types of games, the types of games that the SJWs think we need to put stuff like X cards into, which is to say games like all Dungeons and Dragons games is not the type of games they really want to exist. That's not the type of thing that they want to play. They want to create these story games that are used as propaganda for leftist ideologies. They don't want a game where people have an exciting, immersive experience and where there is no real, propagandistic message being shoved down your throat. So most of the people who use these sort of things, be it the X card or who try to make these kind of demands on a party, are not doing it out of genuine cases of being traumatized or something like that. And I'll tell you why. Because unless, the only circumstance where that might happen is if a DM, through ignorance or through malice, which can happen, but it's pretty rare, is intentionally kind of giving a bait and switch about what his game is about and what he's about, right? Like if you tell your players, well, we're going to play this game where you guys are all, I don't know, where you guys are all people working lower class jobs at McDonald's and you're dealing with your life issues. And then you don't tell them, but you suddenly turn into a zombie apocalypse, right? Which would at least be more fun than the first part of the premise. But if you do this by surprise, the old bait and switch, then you could have a problem, because who knows if someone, I don't know, was attacked by zombies in their childhood or something. Their parents, dressed up as zombies and abused them or something like that, right? Some crazy shit. And they go and they're totally traumatized by this. That can be a problem. But you have to admit that's a very unlikely sort of scenario. It's a very limited scenario. Most of the times, DMs are pretty open about what they're running and what the game is like. And so if you have a player that has some kind of genuine trauma, I think most people who have been in that situation will not decide to go into anything that can potentially, trigger them into that situation. If they're genuine and sincere victims of some kind of traumatic stress, right? So the people who do go into it are people who are going to use that as an excuse to basically play cheap power games with other human beings. Right? That's what they're doing it for. And this is something that you as a DM have no obligation to put up with. There's no circumstance where you can be forced to do this. So don't do it. And if you're a player, don't put up with other players doing it, right? And make sure that you don't allow that sort of stuff to derail your games. And if your whole gaming group doesn't seem to go along with that, then you probably need to get a better quality of gaming group, right? It's not worth it if you can't, get the game experience that you really want. So, feel free to tell me what you think. Once again, you have a right as a player to not join the campaign or to leave the campaign. And that's basically the limit of where your inalienable rights lie. You don't have any other special rights in terms of stuff that happens in the game. Out of the game might be another story, right? There are other situations, but that's something to discuss in some other video. I'm talking about your rights over your player character and your involvement in the game and the game world. You do not get to demand that you have to grant consent for bad things to happen to your character. Your only right is to quit. That's everything for today. If you like this, then support me by buying my excellent products, stuff like Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion and the RPG Pundit Presents series. Just came out last week with Cult of the Saints, which is an RPG Pundit Presents issue that has mechanics and a list of about 46 real medieval saints, some well known, some very weird, and probably not ones you've heard of. That they give you mechanics to incorporate the idea of saints and the veneration of saints and miracles coming from patron saints and stuff like that in your OSR or D&D game. So be sure to check that out if you find that an interesting idea. It's medieval authentic. It's something you can use in your medieval game. It's definitely something you can use in Lion and Dragon. But the mechanics are basic and simple and OSR generalized so that you can incorporate that into pretty much any OSR game if you think your world is something where that could be a really cool idea to add on. It's had some very good reviews so far. So take a look at that. If you want to support me more directly, well, I have a Patreon page. If you're not, like most people nowadays, not very keen on Patreon, check out my blog. And on the right-hand side of my blog, there's a PayPal button, and you can send me a donation care of PayPal. If I get a lot of support, then we'll start doing more videos more often. I'll do live streams and actually announce when I'm going to do them instead of doing them by total surprise, which has been my modus operandi so far. At least I'll try. I'll try my very best, I promise. You guys can probably tell by now, if you've been watching a lot, that it's almost become a mark of pride for this channel to be as amateurish as possible. So don't expect miracles, but I'll try to do better, and I'll do more frequency. That I promise. If I get more, if you back me up some more on here, and you want to see more of this sort of stuff, that's pretty much it for today. Thank you. Oh yeah, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so you get new videos, and share this video. Share it everywhere you want to, because by sharing you spread the word. We're now well over 775 subscribers. We're getting close to 800. After that, soon it's going to be 1,000. Thank you to everyone who subscribed. The more we get it out there, the more subscribers we get, the more that this builds up. And again, thanks to to everybody who's been listening. I really appreciate it. Currently smoking, Neerup, Acorn plus Image Virginia.